rosse bandiere, o proletari alla riscossa, bandiera rossa trionferà. Bandiera rossa deve trionfar, bandiera rossa deve trionfar, bandiera rossa deve trionfar, e viva il comunismo e la libertà, avanti il popolo alla riscossa, bandiera rossa, bandiera rossa.
Let's always remember that at its base, the labour and the trade union movement has a proud tradition of fighting for justice and class unity. It's the tradition of the Lancashire textile workers who, rather than use cotton imported from the Confederate slave owners during the American Civil War, willingly starved in solidarity with them, with the movement against slavery. It's the tradition of the thousands of trade unionists who blocked Mosley's path when he led the fascist black shirts through the Jewish ghetto, or tried to, of Cable Street in 1936. It's the tradition of the labour movement-inspired boycott of South African goods throughout the long years of the struggle against apartheid. It's the tradition of the mass pickets and the trade union blacking of the Grunwick's photo processing laboratory in the 1970s, when Yorkshire coal miners and Glasgow Clydeside shipyard workers stood in solidarity on the picket lines alongside the Asian women workers of that plant, and postal and electricity workers cut off its supplies and brought it to a standstill. So that's why we say the time has come to put Labour back in the forefront of the fight against racism. Now we're really proud of the array of speakers that we have. We have Kevin White, who's a local black Labour activist from West Ham Labour Party. We have Glyn Secker of the Jewish Voice for Labour, which is the genuine voice of Labour Jewish members and supporters, unlike the so-called Jewish Labour movement, a condition of which is neither that you have to be Labour nor that you have to be Jewish, and which has been in the forefront of the struggle to undermine the left and the former Corbyn leadership of the party. We've got our comrade Jabu Nala Hartley from Oxford, from South Africa originally, from Oxford, who we've seen here at our meetings before, who is leading an absolutely exemplary struggle. She was the main activist at the head of the movement to bring down the statue of that notorious slave owner and slave trader Cecil Rhodes, an imperialist Cecil Rhodes, and in the movement to bring down his statue. We have also, we're very proud to have Tia Kurtzinger Edison, who is equally has led an absolutely magnificent struggle, which has won worldwide acclaim and worldwide attention. That's the struggle in Louisville against the murderous police who mowed down a local resident as she was sleeping in her bed, and who has still not been prosecuted or charged with any offence for it. And Tia will be able to give us up-to-date news about the new atrocities that are taking place almost as we speak at the present time. We also, I know that we have, I'm very proud that we have in our audience too, Comrade Karel, who is a leader, or I think the leading activist of the Agricultural Workers Union in South Africa. In others, we have absolutely some heroes and heroines of the struggle against racism and against capitalism in this room today. And I think it's a great tribute, and I'm really looking forward to the outcome of this meeting. We will also have on as one of our main speakers, Comrade Dave Buxton, who is a member of the Unite Community Union, and will be introducing his ideas for the way that this campaign can proceed from this step onwards. So thank you, everybody. I will now hand over. Is Kevin ready to speak? Kevin, where are you? I think he may have, maybe he's still to join us. In that case, Glyn, are you ready to speak? Glyn
Yeah,
Sacker of Jewish Voice for Labour.
fine. Thank you very much. Real honour to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me. So I'm National Secretary of Jewish Voice for Labour. We stand in the tradition of Jewish socialists. You see our byline, we are always with the oppressed, never with the oppressor, unlike some. Okay, so I'm going to have a quick skirt down some aspects of the Labour Party, and then make some comments about the situation of anti-Semitism and fighting racism, and I'm sure overlap with other people some of the things already mentioned about the economic and political situation facing us. Please excuse me, I'm actually reading my text, and I think everyone will realise why one has to be, these days, pretty careful. The Labour Party was founded in 1900. It was still in the age of empire. It grew out of a range of organisations related to the labour movement: craft guilds, friendly societies, powerful trade unions, radical and reformist political groups, tenants' organisations, some non-conformist churches, enfranchised and civil rights organisations. Important to remember that India, Pakistan, Burma and Ceylon, as they were called then, remained British colonies until 1947 and 1948. Imperialism, for which reads slavery, the forceful appropriation of resources and the subjugation of peoples, furnished the wealth which fueled and in the first stages sustained the Industrial Revolution. Racism is a necessary component of imperialism. By defining its victims as less than human, it facilitates their oppression. It is therefore a component of profit and the accumulation of wealth. The development of modern capitalist civilization was thus predicated on racism. In the labour movement, conservative values limited to driving up the price of labour within a market economy historically have sat uncomfortably alongside socialist groups and militant trade unions, often generating considerable internal conflict. But what may surprise some is that a labour movement militantly demanding its piece of the pie of what Lord Salisbury coined as the ransom for social peace, this labour movement had eugenicists in its leadership, Sidney and Beatrice Webb, the founders of the TUC. Its mainstream, therefore, accepting the dominant colonial narrative. It's not to say that the radical socialist components of the movement did not develop an anti-racist consciousness, but to mix metaphors, the Labour Party broad church has always maintained a nave for the missionaries. There is a lineage here, therefore, and it should come as no surprise to find that the first instinct of our new Tony Blair was to protect the racist senior staff in the party headquarters exposed by the leaked report, that all his new appointments of the headquarters staff were white, that he condemned the dethroning of the Colston statue and has not supported its iconic replacement of a black woman. And shockingly, he has made no public statement of support, let alone organised any defence for the MP Dawn Butler, who has been forced to close her offices and surgery because of physical racist attacks. Over the decades, there have been extremely brave, specific battles against racism by black workers and by specific campaigns. There have been occasional and brief riots. There have been national anti-fascist movements. But unlike in the States, there's not here been a consistent national black anti-racist movement until now. However, until the Labour Party deals with its racist legacy, it will remain incapable of developing anti-racist policies on immigration, detention centres, the Prevent programme, Stop and Search, or put its full weight behind the Windrush and Grenfell campaigns, let alone raise a campaign for reparations for the families of the slave trade or the British-induced Bengali famine. Now, racism is not a black problem, it's a white problem. So we commit to total solidarity in action with our black comrades. This is our responsibility in the Labour Party. That's why black and white comrades are now building a group called Black Lives Matter, a Black Lives Matter movement inside the Labour Party. Thanks. Well, you've listened politely to me for 5 minutes, and as Secretary of Jewish Voice for Labour, I haven't mentioned anti-Semitism, and you might be wondering if there's a degree of self-censorship. So I'll start by setting down some criteria and some credentials. My family fled from the pogroms in Eastern Europe before World War I. My lifelong partner and mother of our 2 sons lost a whole generation of her family in the Holocaust. So we are extremely unlikely to underestimate or underreport the dangers of anti-Semitism, let alone engage in it ourselves. Now, there's certainly been anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. The last official statistics are that cases requiring investigation represented 0.6% of the membership, that 0.02% were disciplined, and that, wait for it, 0.0025%, that is 1/500th of 1%, were expelled. To put this in context, the UK national percentage of people holding anti-Semitic views is about 3.4%. So there certainly has been a massive anti-racist campaign in the country. It's been the anti-Semitism campaign aimed at the Labour Party. But where, we might ask, have been the proportionate campaigns against Islamophobia and racism on black people, where the incidents and attacks and deaths utterly dwarf those of anti-Semitism. So there's a question doing the rounds. Are we in a bizarre situation like that of the Emperor's New Clothes in the fable by Hans Christian Andersen, when no one dare tells the Emperor he's naked? There are many reports that questioning the disparity between the media descriptions of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party and the actual statistics risks an accusation of denial, which then elides into an accusation of anti-Semitism. The infamous IHRA definition of anti-Semitism states that criticism of Israel, similar to that levelled against any other country, cannot be regarded as anti-Semitic. Yet where such criticisms have been made, there are many reports that the critics are being accused of anti-Semitism. However, the Black Lives Matter demonstrations in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem by Black Ethiopian, Mizrahi and Sephardi Jews and Palestinians, supported by white Ashkenazi Jews, protesting against the same racist and violent treatment by the police there as takes place in the States, and against the same discrimination and prejudices, shows that there can be no exceptionalism for Israel. The campaign against anti-Semitism's legal opinion on the IHRA definition states that criticism of Zionism, which does not exhibit hatred or hostility to Jews, is not anti-Semitic. However, there are reports that such criticisms are now being defined as anti-Semitic. And where is the jurisdiction hearing all these cases and handing out sentences? Well, it's not the UK courts, but those of the Labour Party, which lack any semblance of due process and natural justice, where there is no right of appeal, where the accusers are kept anonymous, and where there is no right to the provision of legal representation, despite the fact that the party itself engages legal prosecutors. So members are being processed through this travesty, and there is no let up in this. Many leave under the pressure, others are being expelled, and by reports, the vast majority are those who are supporters of the Corbyn programmes. And many, not the subjects of investigation, are now leaving the party disillusioned. So we have a party which is at best accommodating racism, at worst exhibits systemic racism, with an administration still intact, which sought to blow no whistles on the right wing, racist coterie, which sabotaged the 2017 election. But importantly, we still have a mass membership which overwhelmingly supports the progressive policies. And we are now facing the most severe economic crisis since the war. It's going to mean a dramatic contraction of the economy, which both the left and the right analysts are stating is going to produce 3 million unemployed. It's going to generate mass evictions and homelessness, steep rises in abject poverty, local authorities unable to meet even their minimum legal requirements to provide basic services, and a government planning to hike general taxes to repay the emergency COVID support to private companies and the furloughing. We are entering a period where we are likely to experience industrial and social unrest on a scale not seen since the general strike of 1926. And our leader, Starmer, I don't think will lead this fight on the attack against us. I believe he will move to the right, which will open up a space for the resurgence of the left, both in the party and in the unions. We've had a pretty tough experience so far, but actually I think we've been shadow boxing. The real fight is yet to come, and it's going to hit us sooner than we think. So comrades, we need you. There's nowhere else to go. The unions built the Labour Party. They're never going to leave it. We need to clear out the racism from the party, and we need to take back control from the right. We have one hell of a battle and one hell of an opportunity coming up. Whatever you do, stay true to your principles, don't leave, organise and fight. Thank you.
Here now, are you able to? Oh, wait a minute. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yeah.
Okay, yeah, okay, good. Kevin, I believe you're here. Are you ready to speak now?
Yep, I'm on, I'm
Okay.
live. Just to warn everybody, I've got the worst internet in the world despite being on top of a hill. So I could go at any minute. But you getting me loud and clear?
Yes.
Okay, I shall begin. Essentially, I'm talking about, the Black Lives Matters, defunding the police. It's a term that's been bandied around a lot. A lot of the time they're talking about defunding the police, but people are not adding the fact that we need that money to go across to the community so we can come up with alternatives. So defunding the police essentially means refunding the community. And there's no shortage of evidence to verify that good early community support and intervention is the best way of keeping people on the right track and steering those who've ended up on the wrong path back onto the right one. It's the embodiment of the cliched village to raise a child saying. In New York, they've cut $1 billion from the police department's $6 million budget. However, this is likely the council's attempt to disguise imminent coronavirus budget cuts. And with some creative accounting, they're also shifting the cost of some policing services over to the other departments to be funded from their budgets. If the entire cuts to the council's budget is $9 billion, it's highly likely the redistributed funds will not make up for the overall cuts to community support, leaving the BLM defunding agenda no further forward. This is something we need to watch for here. As the aim is better, fairer methods of crime reduction, we have to be wary of the police attempts to police even less efficiently in order to allow an increase in crime while the transition takes place, in order to discredit the defunding initiative. We can't go from something, flawed as it may be, to nothing, then to something. The societal breakdown in that void will be hard to recover from, so it must be a smooth transition, starting with greater consequences for and monitoring of the police, while community centres, rehabilitation centres and other services are built back up. In the community I support most, that's Canning Town in East London, I can point at least 3 poorly funded projects that could have a withering effect on crime if better funded. These projects support families and individuals experiencing often quite severe relationship and personal difficulties. They skew judgment and behaviour in ways liable to bring those people into contact with the criminal justice system. Community activists and groups such as Peach, OCC, Learning Shore, Ubuntu, One Love Creative also help with issues like poor housing, environment and education, conditions that bring about poverty and resentment for support systems that promise but never really deliver. I can also point to police operational issues which would have a positive effect on crime reduction, such as arresting the big money white drug dealers and end users as opposed to the hand-to-mouth young black dealers at the underpaid and gritty end of the supply chain. Every stop and search fulfills a police officer's quota. However, that means police officers are destroying lives to keep their jobs or earn promotion. Meanwhile, they're creating more and more hardened criminals who endanger the public. The system is flawed beyond belief. No surprise that what I believe is that one of the biggest problems is stop and search, and the disproportionate level of black stop and search conducted under use of cautions and harsher courts judgments is destroying black employment prospects. It's putting individuals into a criminal class where illegal opportunities replace employment opportunities. Stop and search conducted for knives overwhelmingly turns up nothing or drugs. The person who is found to be law-abiding is left with a feeling of humiliation and resentment after the search, and the person carrying drugs, though found not to be, as the police would have us believe, an imminent threat to life, is then hauled into the criminal justice system, more often for doing little more than indulging in a bit of Tory entitled youthful drug experimentation. I believe unofficial police profiling of knife carriers as young black men has allowed them to stop and search black men knowing they're unlikely to be armed. However, if of a certain age in particular, it's possible they're carrying drugs, just as their white counterparts do. Conviction for these lesser crimes can often be the start of a journey into a world where protection comes in the form of a weapon. Therefore, we're actually creating weapons carriers by putting them in a world where they don't have police protection, they have to protect themselves. Stop and search is creating more criminals than it's stopping, and it's increasing the severity of subsequent offences. The duality of justice that allows white people to enjoy a life of experimentation and carefree behaviour, when black people, especially our youth, have to spend lives fearing putting a foot wrong or risk being hobbled by a criminal prosecution to the judgmental cries of white people who are fully aware that they and their friends have or still do indulge in the same or worse. That's got to stop. The expectation that all black people must be utterly law-abiding or on their A game at all times, or we deserve what we get, is not realistic or acceptable. We just demand the right to be a bit crap at stuff and not have others instantly default to a belief that we've proven the rule of inferiority. We demand the right to be as good as the last good thing we did, not as good as the last bad thing, while our white counterparts are not judged likewise. To give a crude example, and this may or may not have happened to me or been in that situation, but a white worker who disappears to the pub every Friday for 3 hours, lies about where they were and what they were doing, blows excessive expenses, casually insults all around them and loses staff and clients, will often be judged by the best bits of work they produced. Whereas their black counterpart, who produces the same or better work without the carnage, can often be remembered for little more than their dancing at the Christmas party or the time they gave a poor presentation. We should be allowed to be average and succeed, get by on just one redeeming characteristic: blunder and recover. It's hard to do your best when too many are looking for your worst. We demand equal opportunities, equal judgment, and equal treatment. Defund the police, refund the community with real increases to community group funding. Black Lives Matter. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Kevin. A brilliant opening. Now I'm very happy to bring in Comrade Jabu of the Roads Must Go campaign.
I've unmuted myself. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Jabunala Hartley. I am based in Oxford, in UK, Oxford. I'm originally from South Africa. I'm a daughter of an anti-apartheid activist. I will talk about what's going on in Oxford, or what we have been doing in Oxford. What's been taking place is that there's been a cultural revolution in terms of who has been leading the struggle for change, who has been in the front line of the Black Lives Matters. The youth has been empowered, and they are uniting around various issues that have been brought up here, which are affecting Black communities. One of the recognition that I've been has been very close to my heart, because I'm a chair of the Oxford Living Wage campaign in Oxford, is that they are increasingly connecting the dots of racism in conjunction with capitalism. They are recognizing that racism is rooted in capitalism, and that we have to challenge capitalism in order to eradicate racism. And it's absolutely amazing to hear this coming out of young people who are recognizing this as an international discourse. And what also Black Lives Matter has been able to do is to connect these dots, not just on the basis of the racism that we face as Black people, but the class struggle that is envisaged on all of us as workers. And the most critical, important information that we've been trying to talk about is the miseducation of people, not just Black people, the miseducation of people in general. We have been calling for the decolonization of the curriculum in terms of the statue of Cecil Rhodes, which stands there as a glowing tribute to imperialism. It's right in the middle of Oxford in the Oriel College, and I'm sure a lot of you must have seen the huge march that we had, which was there was an estimation of about 6,000 people who were there. I was one of the speakers that was calling for the tearing down of the Cecil Rhodes statue. As Oxford Black activist, I'm also part of Oxford Anti-Racist City. I am the co-founder of the Oxford Anti-Racist City. Oxford Anti-Racist City sort of emerged around 2 years ago, where we have been conducting local workshops with local communities who've come in from all sorts of backgrounds, to come and talk about their experiences with racism. It's been really interesting to hear even how white comrades who talked about how uncomfortable they felt when they've been in situations where they have been with with a Black person who's their friend, and their friend was treated unfairly. And it was really, because as Black people, we wouldn't think that some people can really feel what we feel, but to see them crying and saying, I was so humiliated the way they were treating my friends. But also as part of the Oxford Anti-Racist City, we're hoping to raise a much more stronger awareness in terms of challenging racism structurally through organizations, and just not just as a sort of like a moment of what is happening now, but as an ongoing challenge to structural and institutional racism. I had that. So I've just been to a big stand up to racism youth, what you call event now before I came in, and to hear young people, the way they are mobilizing their communities around things that they want to do in terms of initiatives that they want to do in terms of challenging racism in education, in health, in the criminal justice system. Going to the criminal justice system, which Kevin has just outlined it so clearly. We have also got an initiative which I've also founded in Oxford, which is talking about, which is called Mothers for Justice Ubuntu. Our aim is to intervene when the children or whoever is arrested at the point of arrest, and have structures that will engage with the police in terms of going to police stations and being sort of like there to intervene and finding lawyers that are sympathetic to the causes and intervening and helping young Black people. We've had one of first event where we had stop and search powers, where we had policemen come and explain what it is that seems to disproportionately target young Black men as a policy for the stop and search. I mean, it's mostly explained the processes of stop and search, but even him himself, he couldn't explain why disproportionately they were targeting young Black men. Even when I pointed out that the report from the Macpherson, which talked about the institutionalized racism of the force, what he felt about that. And it was interesting to hear a policeman talk about the policemen who are concerned also and wanting to reform the system. So things are happening. We're seeing the Black Lives Matters having that effect, even though there's a lot of resistance in terms of the old colonialist, imperialist who don't want to see changes. But it's also interesting what some of our colleagues who spoke about the Labour Party being complacent, being complicit in its policies and not wanting to see the eradication or to commit to reparations and all those things. So what's the focus is on this. It's important to talk about where inequalities are prevalent as a justification. Always the tendency is to always blame the victims of the police brutality of these systems, that basically these people are not trying hard enough. So we need to see, like for instance, we had an incident in London where there was a man that had his they had nailed on his neck. And one thing I noticed about the media, the report was focusing on the fact that he was later found with a knife, but they didn't want to focus on the fact that even though he was found with a knife, what was happening, it was inhumane in the street of the UK, especially in the plight of what's happening in the US regarding the Black Lives Matter and George Floyd. So also one thing before I finish, what I wanted to say, as an Oxford Living Wage campaign, we're also trying to link with Black Lives Matter in terms of the worker struggle. We are very much aware that internationally the racism that is envisages on the difference between the North and South divide regarding the wealth distribution, where the billionaires are talking about there's been an improvement now that people in the global South can they are now able to earn equivalent of $2 per day, which is absolute. It's an absolute travesty that in this day and age there is such gross inequalities, and these inequalities in terms of housing, health, and everything are a huge contributory factor to our to the racism that we are experiencing internationally today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tia. Jabu. Tia, are you available to speak now?
Yes, I'm here.
Tia from Louisville, needs no introduction. Please carry on.
Well, here we are. We're on day like 51 or 52 of occupying a park that is in the center of like the business district, and more importantly, the jurisdictional district. Like we have the city hall, the metro council, the courthouse, and the police station. And so it's been very toxic trying to hold the space for this long. There was a shooting June 28th, I believe it is, and 29th. That was the same day we were supposed to get threats from a white supremacist group to come and do a counter protest. And actually, I think in an hour, there is a blue line rally in support of police officers. So if everybody doesn't know, we are fighting for justice for Breonna Taylor. Breonna Taylor was an EMT from Louisville. It was a botched 5 no-knock warrants, and we did get what we call the Breonna's Law passed, that they're no longer able to use no-knock warrants. So moving forward, I'm pretty pessimistic even, but well, actually not really, because Tuesday I got locked up, and it was because we sat on the lawn. We had a peaceful protest, a civil disobedience at the Attorney General's house, Daniel Cameron, who is Mitch McConnell's protege, and we were peaceful. We did not resist arrest. We were charged with felonies. And earlier this year, there was a white supremacist group that went onto the governor's mansion and hung a dummy from a noose, and they were all armed with rifles, and there was not even any interaction with police officers. So I agree with, I'm just telling you, like, just on my local level, and I absolutely agree to defund the police. And what that looks like is that you're divesting into their pensions. If they have shot and killed anyone, you are you have a civilian police review board that will investigate the police, and not the police investigate each other. Let's see, and you will invest into the community. And in these 50 something days, we have really been grassroots working on the generations of trauma that has been inflicted in our community for so many years, hundreds of years. But in the trauma, we had to teach folks how to move and maneuver and strategize and pivot in life based on the trauma that they are experiencing. So you have to have both of that going on at the same time. And I will say that if you are trying to find like certain points to start, I would start and you think that there's, some police brutality, or there is, like, call for data from the police. Like, how many times was whatever it is that someone is getting locked up for, because like in our case, we was locked up and there was 87 of us, and most of the white folks did not even get trespassing charges, and the black folks did. I'm a local organizer, and I was locked up for 18 hours, where there was, people getting out after 9 hours and 10 hours and 11 hours. And I was in there the longest, and I was like in isolation in my own cell block for at least 2 hours by myself. So it's just their tactic, their culture, and we need all the attention, because even after that, David McAtee was shot and killed by the National Guard in his business. And so that's not even being talked about right now. There's so many issues right now, and I think it's really coming to a boiling point. And how we react is going to determine a lot of things. We have a militant, black militant group that's supposed to be coming in town in the next week, and they've reached out to some of the grassroots organizations to try to get accommodation and housing. Then, the organization that I got arrested with, they're out of New York, And Tamika Mallory, she was a co-founder of the Women's March in 2017. So a lot is happening, and I can answer anyone's questions if anyone has any questions. Thank you. Thank you, Solidarity.
Comrades. Right, I'm sorry, comrade. Next, I want to call Dave Buxton from Unite. You ready, Dave?
Yeah, thanks, Roger. Okay, I think this meeting was billed as Black Lives Matter in the UK as well. So, and the reason being is because we've had two meetings on America, and of course, that is where the focus lies. But the fact is, we have our own problem in Britain with racism, and I think that was expressed through Brexit, where there was this undercurrent of racism that existed, and that card was played either overtly or covertly, where messages are being sent to indicate that there's too many aliens, too many immigrants here, and these sorts of messages enabled Brexit to take place. And that was the main reason I voted against Brexit, because really I thought if I voted the other way, I'd be supporting these racists. So, and why did many of these people vote Brexit? And I think it's to do with the colonial education system, that there's still residues of it in this country. From time to time, you'll find textbooks with racist imagery or phrases within it, because basically, as a colonial and slave dominant country over many years, the ideology and racism is still there, and it needs to be cleansed out of our society. And I think I would just mention the impact in just in the 20th century. In 1919, just after the First World War, colonial coloured troops from the Empire who fought in World War I, they weren't allowed to march on the Victory Parade down Whitehall. They were kept out of it because they were coloured, having risked their lives in the First World War. But also in the same year, there were racist attacks against blacks, which they called race riots, in a series of areas: Glasgow, Limehouse in London, Hull, Newport, Barry, Cardiff and Liverpool. And basically, not all colonial troops were sent back to their home countries after the war, and then right-wing racists stirred up hatred against these black people, and basically attacks were launched on their hostels and different places where they stayed. Also, other groups like Chinese and Asian people, as well as white women who were married or partnered to black people. Now, those facts I read in this book, Black and British, by David Olasuga, who's got a very good series on the television, which I would recommend, and I'm learning quite a lot. And the reason I like to show books is because I think we can all learn more facts. From after that situation, in the 20s, new orders were published by the government, where it sought to create the category of people called aliens, where, like these black seamen and people from the colonial wars, if they couldn't show their papers to prove that they were members of the British Empire, which many of them didn't have papers when they were part of the British Navy or the Merchant Navy, then they would be classed as an alien, and then they could just be easily removed from the country. That's in the 1920s. In 1948, a mob of 2,000 people attacked a hostel occupied by black seamen in Liverpool. And the police, rather than protect these people in the hostel, they actually took the black people out of the hostel and arrested them. Now, I'm mentioning these things because I'm showing you there's a pattern here in terms of where the racism in society, how it was in the 20th century, has it gone away, or has those sorts of issues still continue to burn a sense of injustice in this country? In 1958, gangs of white fascists attacked homes of West Indians in Notting Hill, and they had to defend their communities. And that lasted a few days. So these fascist gangs basically went to the homes of blacks and were either attacking them with knives, clubs, iron bars. But of course, it's described as a race riot, and the blacks are told are charged with being equally responsible as the racists who were attacking them. What results from that attack in 1958 in Notting Hill is Claudia Jones organises the first Notting Hill Carnival in response to those riots in a town hall in that part of London. A very positive reaction, I would say, to those racist attacks. In 1970, there was the Mangrove 9 trial that lasted 55 days, and someone called Darcus Howe, who many of you probably have heard of, with his comrades successfully mounted a defence against the charges of riots. So they were very, very serious charges. Basically, they had a demonstration because they wanted to protest against the continual harassment, raids against their restaurant, which was the centre of the black community in that part of Notting Hill. And the police kept raiding it, and the licence was taken away from the owner. So they had a march of 150 people, and from that they were charged with riots. In 1980, there was an uprising against police brutality in Bristol. In 1981, there was a fire in a party in New Cross that killed 13 young people. And to this day, the black community in that area believe that racists started that fire. Now, Darcus Howe was involved in organising the Black People's Day of Action, where over 20,000 people, mainly black people, demonstrated against that fire and those killings. And then we had other uprisings against police brutality and harassment. In 1981, Toxteth and Brixton. 1985, Cynthia Jarrett died of a heart attack following a raid on her home in Broadwater Farm, and as we know, there was a reaction to that of the community on Broadwater Farm, and a police officer was killed there. 1993, Stephen Lawrence was murdered by racists. In 2001, there were riots in Oldham, followed by Bradford, Leeds and Burnley. And the BNP and the National Front stood candidates in Oldham to whip up hatred against the Asian community in those areas I've just mentioned. In 2011, Mark Duggan was shot by police, and there was a peaceful demonstration at Tottenham Police Station. There followed riots all over London and then in many other cities around the country. So that is a potted history of black struggle, and there are many, many other examples that other people could mention that says that we have got a history of slavery and colonialism that is still an undercurrent in this country, that Brexit has really whipped up, and we need to recognise that that struggle is ongoing. So our response to that has to be solidarity. And I say that because Fred Hampton of the Illinois branch of the Black Panthers Party said, "You don't fight racism with racism, you fight racism with solidarity." And in Illinois and other American cities, the Black Panthers were armed because the Constitution in America allowed all citizens to carry arms. If they carried arms openly, then that's what they could. So the Black Panthers were radical. They were in your face, and they said to the police, "We're not allowing you to come into our communities and just harass people and then lock them up or kill them. We're going to protect our own." And so that's why a lot of the imagery of the Black Panthers shows them armed. But however, their main areas of action were actually food programs to feed hungry children, black and white children. They were education programs as well. And they also said that they were not for segregation, for Black nationalism, but they were for working with all sorts of different groups within America. And in fact, the example of the Black Panthers in Illinois shows how powerful a model that can be, because there was something they built called the Rainbow Coalition, where there were even white Confederate groups in Chicago, and the Black Panthers. I've seen a film of the two Black Panther members going to a meeting of white, poor Confederate supporting poor people in Chicago, and basically having a conversation that says, "Well, what are your problems? We're here to talk about your problems." And then they'd list all the things: bad housing, poor education, lack of jobs, etc., etc. So these Black Panthers say, "They're just the same problems that we're suffering with. We need to work together, brothers." And they actually did work together so successfully that at some points, these white Confederate supporting people would actually provide protection in some of the meetings of the Black Panthers. Now, also that led to the election eventually of a mayor in Chicago who worked alongside these rainbow groups of different communities struggling against poverty and oppression. And that was seen as a model for how you could build a more progressive and radical form of organizations to challenge American racism and poverty that exists there. And I'm mentioning this because I'm talking about solidarity. If you can have a group like the Black Panthers who can work in that way, and they also call themselves revolutionary socialists, and I think it shows that here is a model where it says that we can work for a better society, and we can work with all these other groups, and we can be successful. Now, Fred Hampton also was on the cusp of getting gang members to join the Black Panther Party. Gangs in Chicago, which was, let's say, were causing havoc in communities, there were serious talks about them joining the Black Panthers. And it's at this point, at the age of 21, that the American state with the local police assassinated Fred Hampton whilst he slept. So it's an example where they can't shoot all revolutionaries like Fred Hampton. And if we spread those ideas of how we organize for what aim, for these radical aims, and we build campaigns that are about trying to improve people's lives in a real way through food programs, feeding hungry children, campaigning for better housing, better education, but more importantly, for changing society fundamentally, then we can be successful. And we need to be talking to young people about these, from historical examples of what actually was successful and what wasn't successful, and how we build these campaigns and for what aims. Now, we've come up with a list of things for the labour movement, and we should be passing, for those who are in the Labour Party, we should be passing resolutions for the Labour Party to make a clear and comprehensive statement on racism, slavery, and the colonial legacy. That means to say, these are the things that were done in the name of the British Empire. Now, although the Labour Party was founded as a workers' party, it also was part of imperialist Britain, which one of the other speakers has mentioned. And we have that legacy that's there within our movement that needs to be cleansed, if you like, and challenge those ideas that still prevail in society. We need to demand for justice for Black people and the prosecution of police responsible for the death of Black people. Now, as far as I can recall, there are no successful prosecutions of police for killing Black people in this country. So that's the UK perspective. These killings are going on too regularly, and someone needs to be brought to book for these killings. If there are people who benefited and profited from the apartheid regime in South Africa, they shouldn't be members of the Labour Party, and they should be expelled. We need to support an anti-racist school curriculum to deal with colonialism, slavery, and enduring racism, and also in universities. At my last union meeting, I was talking about these issues, and there was an NEU, a member of the teachers union there, and they said, this is the very issue we want to raise in our own union. So you can see within the labour movement, if we pass motions about these issues, we could actually start to get a wider breadth of society who says, we accept that we need to change. Now, locally, all over the country, there's demonstrations, Black Lives Matter, taking the knee. And I've been asked to speak, and right now I haven't taken up that opportunity, but I think I will be taking up an opportunity, and so should all of us, that if we believe in these ideas, that we need to change society to end racism, to end other forms of oppression, then we ought to be bold about saying the need to create a new and a different society based on equality. But we should also ask the Labour leadership to condemn the US actions and their oppressive treatment of Blacks, which are far harsher than they are in this country. So there are things that we can do, demands that we can make within our own movement that will help to build and sustain this feeling that has existed since George Floyd's killing. Now, I just want to say that, I'll finish on this, that I think the social circumstances of COVID-19 mean that people have had more time to reflect on and see that video. If you saw the video of the policeman with his knee on his neck for almost 9 minutes, it's just horrendous. And so people could reflect on that. Also, people were at home, so they felt a sense of anger. And then when people took to the streets, more people were around. They didn't have to go to work to take to the streets. And that example has flourished all around the world, so that people are now a part of a movement. But also, more recently, we've seen the climate change protesters from school students as young as 12, 13 and older, striking, actually showing an example to us, the older generation, of that they're not going to take it anymore, that their future is jeopardized if the world carries on as it is. And that's because capitalism is the dominant form in society now. You can't say, oh, there's an alternative, there's communism in Russia and Eastern Europe and in China. It's capitalism. And capitalism's only answer that it has is to get us back on track after COVID-19, is to restore growth. How will that address the climate change? How will that address another health emergency, another virus that attacks the human population? And how will that address this racist epidemic that we have, that capitalism needs racism and other forms of social divisions such as sexism and prejudice against gays? How will any of that be tackled by growth? All of these things require us to change society. And I think that's really, we've got to put that to the fore of our thinking, and how that we put these demands within these struggles, particularly to young people, so that we can actually make a forward progress towards creating a new society. I think that's the answer. And I'd like to hear your views on these matters.
Right. Right, thank you, Dave. Thank you to all the comrades who've spoken so far. Every one of them really an inspiration. And I think the point that we always have to come back to is, well, Dave quoted Fred Hampton, who was an absolute inspiration. And no wonder that the police actually broke into his bedroom and shot him as he lay in bed, shot him dead, as they did Malcolm X, as they did Martin Luther King, and all of them. It's very interesting to note that all of them began from a standpoint of simply of defending the black population against racism, and they all moved to a position very rapidly and very explicitly of the only solution is for the working class to unite, and for the working class to unite as a class. And that's because divide and rule is basically, it's the only way that the capitalists can stay afloat. It's the only way that they can stay in power is by harnessing the discontent of the people that they exploit and somehow manipulating things in order to turn that discontent and that determination to change things, to turn that into a fratricidal struggle between black and white, between one religion and another, between different genders and so on. And therefore, what we have to take from this, as all the comrades have ended up on this note, that we have to end up not just by talking about this, although talking about this and learning the history is vital and is crucial, but also in organizing a mass campaign. And what we've heard from the inspiring examples of Jabu in Oxford, of Tia in Louisville, and around the world, the Black Lives Matter movement, is that now the time has come for a real mass campaign. Now that's the reason that in the notice that was sent round in preparation for this meeting, there was a draft of a leaflet which was headed Labour Against Racism. And I think the point is that we have to make it absolutely clear to everybody and understand it ourselves that it's Labour, it's the working class, it's those traditions I spoke of before through the whole history of the working class to fight against racism and in solidarity with the victimized and the oppressed around the world. And therefore, I hope that in the discussion, we can focus now on what we can do in order to mobilize, agitate, and create a mass campaign through the labour movement, which will also be a campaign to purify and regenerate the labour movement and to save it from the clutches of those people who want to turn it back into another party that used for the purposes of our class enemies, so the ruling class. So I would like comrades to come in. We have comrades from a number of countries here, and many of them with proud histories of struggle themselves. I hope that they are going to come into the discussion, but I hope also that we're going to end up with a platform and a program, and that we can discuss how we can go forward in really giving an impetus to this campaign. So who wants to speak first? I don't see the participants list. Ah, right. We've got Oxford BLM. Who are you, Oxford BLM? Please come in. Hello, Oxford BLM.
Ask them to unmute, Roger.
You have to unmute, please. You got your hand up there.
Can you hear me?
Ah, yes. Hello. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'd just like to sort of support what Kevin and Jabu were saying about the position with young people in UK in relation to the police, young black people. I'll give you a little bit of hope in this situation, just a little bit. We've been working for several years with a young black man. He's a younger teenager. From when he was a primary school student, his parents were concerned about him. He'd experienced trauma in childhood and his behavior at school was difficult. And when he went from the primary school, where they had been able to help him, to the high school, it wasn't followed up. The high school was in chaos. And he had various discipline issues there. And they were treating him as a naughty boy. And for 14 months, this went on, and they nearly threw him out of the school. We went to a meeting, and we basically confronted them with the fact that this young man was in need of mental health support, which wasn't available at that time. And it took us a further, I think, well, it took 2 years in total for this behavior, from it starting to be a problem to actually getting him some mental health support services in the city of Oxford. Can you believe it? Yeah, a child. Yeah. And so what he did in that time was he took a knife to school. He was involved in stealing. He was involved in aggressive behavior at school. He was involved in arson, mild case of arson, where he set a backyard fence on fire. But basically, and I have to say this, on this occasion, the police did restrain themselves. And when he disappeared from home, they brought him back several times, and they didn't charge him because they knew he was waiting for mental health support. And on this one occasion, the police seemed to have done the right thing. After that child got mental health support, his behavior improved significantly, and he hasn't gone into the criminal justice system. Because if he had, he would now be a lost soul. In that sense, he would be in that machinery of destruction. But it took 2 years. And in these sorts of gaps, this is where people fall foul of less sympathetic police officers, of, the machine that eats them and spits them out into what you might call the prison industrial complex, or the from school to prison to, yeah. So I will just underline, we know these cases, we've dealt with them, yeah. And it's absolutely vital to keep these young people out of the criminal justice system. There was an experiment conducted through the courts, through the probation service, a few years ago in an inner city area in the United Kingdom, where an actual double-blind trial was conducted, and 50% of cases involving first offence teenagers were just simply cancelled, and 50% were proceeded with as normal. And then an analysis was done as to the criminal career development, as it were, of these different groups. And the group that was just had the charge cancelled showed a lot less development of any further involvement with the criminal justice system. I mean, by about 95% or something, yeah? Whereas the ones who were dealt with, even for a very minor offence, through the criminal justice system, went on to have a career. So I'll just reiterate what's been said here. I mean, it's really significant and really important. Thank you.
Thank you. Have you got a name? Sorry, comrade.
Well, my name's Tim.
Tim, thank you, Tim. Now, sorry, I'm just checking. Nicole, are you ready to come in now, please? Nicole Jamila, if you just unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm here just to support and listening more. Thank you very much. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, carry on.
Yeah, no, not much to say. Just thank you for the platform. I'm here to just support and listening. Thank you for the invite, Jabu. Thanks a lot. I'm just
Okay,
here to
thank you.
support. Yeah, thank you much. I'm just here listening.
Thank you, comrade.
Bye for now. Black Lives Matters.
We have no other hands up at the moment.
Roger,
Yeah.
um,
Dave.
can I add something that I missed? Because we invited an organisation called Movement for Justice by Any Means Necessary to send a speaker, and they basically said they couldn't make it because for a lot of this week they've been involved in a high court case, and I think it's regarding a Ugandan lesbian activist who was sent back to Uganda as an illegal overstayer. And she was brought back to the UK because the government had wrongly used the fast track rules to remove her, and they were challenging it in the Court of Appeal this week. And I think that's been successful. And they also had a 3-hour meeting this afternoon of their members where they were discussing aspects of that case. And so they couldn't send a speaker, but they wanted to send their solidarity messages to this meeting. And when I mentioned solidarity as being one of the ways to tackle racism, I think that's puts an owner on non-black people to get involved in these campaigns, because what I was told by one of their activists was that they see that the immigration issue, where illegal immigrants are basically scapegoated, and they work in all sorts of low paid and, as we've seen during COVID, highly vital services for this country, and then they're basically thrown on the scrap heap as soon as their services are no longer required. As we've seen with the recent announcement of a list of employees who were going to be given easy access to stay in the country, care workers were not one of those groups. And it's plain racism, because a high proportion of those will be black and other ethnic groups. And yet they provide such a vital service that we need in this country. And they're saying that if we have a successful campaign to break down that racism against immigrant communities, particularly the most vulnerable ones, it will go a long way to challenge racism. And I think that solidarity means that we should now look at those serious organisations, and that one's been going 10 years, and say, how can we support them? What work can we do to support them? Because unless we do step up, some of us, and get involved, then we can't really say we're acting in solidarity. So I just wanted to add their message of support to the meeting that we had, and just to put that on the agenda. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Thanks, Dave. Well, somebody mentioned on the chat the number of nationalities. I've counted at least 8 nationalities that are represented here. Most of them, or many of them that I know, have been involved in quite heroic struggles of their own. And I hope that they'll be willing to come in and share their experiences with us. But again, we want to end up this meeting not just feeling a kind of warm sense of solidarity and comradeship, but also with some practical ideas as to how we can go forward. I would hope that some of us maybe could agree to meet together in order to plan and launch a serious campaign. We're not setting up in rivalry with any other existing groups, but I think that it's important that we have a huge part to play for the reasons that I've mentioned and other comrades have referred to. So I think we should end up with maybe delegating certain comrades to meet together and to take the next steps in order to take the campaign forward. I hope, for instance, that we can meet with Glyn, because I know that he's involved with some very serious work around the same lines as what we've been discussing. I would like to ask, I don't know if we have anybody with yes, we have. Right, Carol Buxton, please. Where are you? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Hello. Basically, I was just wondering if you have, if there is yet a Labour Black Lives Matter network, national network as such. Do we know if there is one? A Labour Party or Labour, a trade union related Black Lives Matter networking group? Because I'm sure there are many individuals here involved in their own local solidarity organisations or their own local Black Lives Matter. But I don't know of one other than this group that Jabu has introduced some people in Oxford and other places too.
Okay. All right,
that's just a suggestion, yeah?
Yeah, no, very good. And I think Glyn has some ideas on that. I think if you could just wait a moment, please, we can call Carell in first. And Glyn, we'll hear your response to that after, please, yeah? Carell.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Right. Okay, so I'm from West Ham Labour Party in East London, and I just want to talk about two things really. First of all, the racism that exists in the Labour Party. There is a real hierarchy of racism in the Labour Party, and I think the leaked report earlier this year showed you the terrible racism that exists from some of the bureaucrats at the top echelons of the Labour Party. It was evident from the terms that were used, particularly about people like Diane Abbott, Dawn Butler, Clive Lewis, etc., and other black comrades, that they have suffered and are suffering now terrible racism, not just from outside of the Labour Party, from ordinary residents of this country, but from people within the Labour Party who are very powerful. And some of those people, I know a few have been suspended, but some of them are still working at very powerful jobs. People like Emily Oldknow, who's still an Assistant General Secretary of Unison. So this continues. And I know within my own family, my nephew, who's 20, and a black boy, and by the way, I asked him when he came to see me this week, how many times have you been stopped by the police? And he said, oh, in my car, well, at least 5 times, and walking the street a lot more than that. How many times have you been stopped, Auntie? And I've never been stopped by the police in my car, not once. And I've been driving 10 times longer than him, but by the by. So I think the leaked report showed the racism that exists in the Labour Party. It's structural, it's Labour Party members are leaving, like my 20-year-old nephew, just had enough of it. And I think that is very sad. And I think what we have to do is look at a campaign that not only challenges the racism that exists in the Labour Party, in other words, challenges that hierarchy, challenges people like Keir Starmer, who, for him, Black Lives Matter's only a moment. He's done nothing to defend Dawn Butler. It took him ages even to come out with a statement to condemn the people that had bullied her so badly and put her life under threat that she had to close her constituency office. This is the reality of the privileged people who don't see themselves as socialists. They're not socialists. In fact, in many ways, they're not even liberals. They are awful right-wing centrists. And as Glyn said, they're not going to be able to lead us through what is going to be the greatest economic crisis we've ever seen, and all of the tsunami of unrest that it will bring. So I think that we should be holding a mirror up to the Labour Party. We should launch a campaign. I don't care what you call it, but I think we should be holding the Labour Party to account. And at the same time, we should be looking outside and giving solidarity to groups locally within our own communities. Groups that you might not think straight away are linked with Black Lives Matter, but they may be groups that are dealing with food banks. There may be groups that are doing breakfast clubs, etc. And by being involved in those sort of organisations as socialists, you are standing side by side in solidarity with your class. Dave and Roger quoted Fred Hampton. And, you know, one of the things I think is really important as revolutionary socialists, when we're working in our community, a lot of the people that we're dealing with are not socialists, revolutionary socialists like we are. Not now, they might be soon, but they're not at the moment. And I want to quote this from Fred Hampton, because, you know, the Panthers had fantastic healthcare, ambulance service, breakfast clubs for their kids. And he said this, I had to look at it because I can't remember it off by heart. I don't know if I like communism, and I don't know if I like socialism, but I know that the Breakfast for Children program feeds my kids. And if you put your hands on that Breakfast for Children program, we'll be there with our guns. So I think those sorts of things are really, really important. That's the sort of work we should be doing in our community.
Thank you, Carol. Yes. Galina, do you want to come back quickly on that query?
Yeah, thanks for the heads up, people. We've been talking with Roger, would really like to talk with Dave. In Dulwich and West Norwood, we're working to produce a Black Lives Labour group, therefore inside the Labour Party, to do what's just being talked about, addressing the racism inside the Labour Party. And obviously we want to spread out and be as inclusive as possible. So we're at the stage where we're beginning to launch a Facebook page. We've got to put together a website, and we need to develop it across different CLP branches and into unions. And exactly along the lines that Dave was talking about, we need to get a handle on this.
Thanks, Glenn. All right, I'm now going to call in David Hampson.
Well, look, greetings to everybody. You know, I'm sitting here in sweltering DC, where things are quiet, but there's no peace. And, you know, we're expecting further explosions, particularly now that Trump has put together a federal force, which appears out of nowhere, highly armed, and is going and kidnapping people and then suddenly releasing them. It reminds me actually of the kind of conditions there are in Zimbabwe, which is another totally autocratic state. But anyway, we've had a marvelous range of opinions and the sharing of experiences. Glenn's work, I mean, you've read from a prepared statement, but you know, it shows so much thought, you know, has gone into those issues, and it's really marvelous because you show absolutely definitively, you know, how, you know, anti-Semitism has been used on this occasion, you know, to try and diffuse anti-racism and the actions, you know, which should be taken by all, you know, Labour Party members and by the Labour movement as a whole. You know, Kevin has spelt out a number of issues. Dave has given a wider range of issues out there. And then we've had Jabu. You know, I'm very proud of Jabu's record because there's something of a personal connection there, but it's absolutely marvelous, you know, to see the work that's been done there in a very systematic way, but in and through the labor movement, ranging from low-wage issues, which again are the vulnerable people who are working in a number of sectors and yet are suffering, you know, really poor labor, you know, employment conditions, as well as an idea which, you know, sounds great, which is citywide anti-racist campaigns. Maybe something like the protection that some cities are giving to immigrants who are vulnerable in America. I mean, there's so many ideas out there. The question which we, I think, are putting together in the document which Rogers referred to, is the term labor against racism. In other words, labor has to take responsibility for the action of working people. In other words, as to fight for working people and to fight against a labor leadership which is not doing anything, which is standing, wringing its hands if it's nice, or actually even condemning actions which are taken on the streets. Now, why I'm so positive, and I think why we should all be very positive, is that the mood among the youth is absolutely tremendous. Just have a look at Tia's Facebook if you could. The people who are in prison, who you imagine would be downcast, that's in Louisville, are I wouldn't say triumphant, but they're defiant. There's a young black women and white youth as well involved there. And, they are determining the future. In Britain, as we've heard from Jabu, there's a marvelous spirit among the youth where the white youth are also incensed. It's not just because you're black and you're facing this stopping and searching, which, Correll's just pointed out. And it's absolutely invidious way of handling people. But it's actually the white youth who are also now outraged that their friends can be treated in this way. Where is this modern society, which is meant to be a democratic society, when in America there's deregistration of voters, and where in Britain we see that black youth and black people are treated in this way? So I'm looking to see if we can't get united action. Let's take the idea that Job was put forward of anti-racist city. Job, if you could circulate the ideas that were there, and let's see if we could carry them out in different ways. Is that a tool to use? The Mothers for Justice, to give practical support to families which are going through hell when they've got their youth in the hands of the police. And then we've got this, the idea of a campaign against to prosecute the police when they're youth dying at their hands and they're getting away with it, just like in America. I mean, it's a shame to the British justice system that these things could happen. Now, there are 101 issues there. What we need is a united action on 2 or 3, which will make a difference and become a lever to be able to show that there's something which is more than just a range of issues to deal with, but actually we're able to do something about those and to make a difference. So I'm looking forward, if we can, to getting such a discussion going. Mm-hmm.
All right, thank you. I think we have Tracy and Kieran. Are you ready to speak? You have to unmute yourself, please.
Hello. Yeah. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, you can hear me. My name's Kieran Walsh, and I'm the chair of East Oxford Community Association. And we felt that it was our duty to assist the local Black Lives Matter group develop the movement in the city as they emerge. Really exciting development, led by young black and white people, a lot of young women involved. It was amazing what they achieved. Totally it transformed politics in Oxford within weeks. The most exciting movement that had existed in Oxford in 20 years easily. And bringing together the poor excluded. Oxford's 2 cities. There's East Oxford, and then there's the rest of the city, which is affluent. There is one of the sharpest gradients of poverty in Oxford, anywhere in the developed world. This is a rich city, and yet here we have deprived communities, and we have migrants who actually service the university and do all the menial tasks in this city, and they live very precarious existences. And it's movements like Jabu's that assist these people, the real community in Oxford, who don't have all the advantages of those other people in Oxford connected with the university. And the work that Jabu does and other campaigning groups in the city has been essential in bringing the young white middle-class youth and the local black youth together, along with the students that were remaining in the youth. Don't forget that the university has been closed, so that this action in Oxford has been dominated by local people, which has brought it to the centre of international attention, and led by local working class black young people. Absolutely outstanding for this to have happened, and it's that coming together. But now, in the aftermath of COVID-19, the university, one of the richest educational institutions on the planet, now pleads poverty. So who will suffer? The people who will suffer, who will be made redundant, are those migrant workers who are treated, who are right at the bottom of the social scale in this town, but they're the first ones that will pay the price. So we have been saying, as far as decolonisation and reparation go, the first thing that needs to be done is the production of some sort of social justice in Oxford itself, a redistribution of the wealth and the respect and recognition from the university to the local working class population, black and migrant, that keep this city running, that keep the university running, keeps the NHS running, and keeps local transport running, and makes Oxford a nice place to live. That's what the Black Lives Matter movement means for us in East Oxford, and that's why East Oxford Community Association has been proud to support it. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Kieran. Thank you very much. We don't have anybody with their hands up. I've got to put a comrade on the spot now. I hope he doesn't mind.
Roger.
Dave?
Yeah, I just have a quick question.
Yeah, go on.
Before you go. I'd like, following up from David Hempson's mentioning of anti-racist cities and the role that Jabu played in that, I'd like to directly ask Jabu to say, what potential do you think that has as a part of a demand of a campaign against racism, Labour against racism, that we get involved in our local areas and demand that our local authorities or the city declares themselves an anti-racist city, but only on the basis of a list of action points. So, for example, the decolonising of the education system. Because otherwise, if it's not backed up with a demand of practical action points, then what you'll end up with is what I remember in the 70s and 80s. Oh, this council is a nuclear-free council, but they still had trains with nuclear materials travelling through it. So it was a completely meaningless thing. I mean, what councils have nuclear power stations in their backyard anyway? So those sorts of tokenistic gestures are meaningless. But I could see that campaigning to have your local authority or city declare themselves an anti-racist city with a list of hard action points can make a real difference. What does Jabu think of that issue?
Jabu.
Hello, thank you, Dave, for that question. Yeah, it's really important that we have a council that recognizes that it has to declare that it's still working in progress. I'm not going to glorify the Oxford City Council and say they are actually sticking to the Oxford anti-racist city as a principle. We've had the Oxford Black Lives Matters throw a couple of demands to them, which they were quite resistant to. They did sign the Cecil Roads must come down petition to bring roads down, but it's still a long way. As Kieran has just explained, even about the Oxford, what you call community center, which really does quite a lot for the immigrant population in Oxford. There's been it's been threatened with closure. It's been undermined in terms of what it does for the community, and a lot of the communities like who come from come from African backgrounds or East Timor, and a lot of communities that don't have the financial power to actually have their own community centers, like where you have people who can have mosques or who can have synagogues. A lot of these communities do not have this access to having their own centers, and a lot of the community centers have been closed for them to be able to access community action, or so that they can get together and form some cultural, structural forces around what they do as a community. And also the another issue that was just want to link it to Glenn and the proposal that we should have some kind of Black Lives Matter in the Labour Party. Yes, I think that's very important. It's also very important to have Black people's faces in these fronting these these organizations, because what then tends to happen is that we have the criticism that whilst these may be the plights that affect a lot of Black people, but their voices tends to get stifled in terms of leading the movements that are talking about their plight. So it's quite important. Yes, we need to challenge the party about its complacency in complicit behavior in the historical story of racism in terms of what has happened in colonial history. So basically, I just want to say, yes, we have the Oxford Anti-Racist City. It's mostly been coming from a grassroots level in terms of what we are proposing to do for the future, but it's work in progress. But other cities like Manchester, Liverpool are forming their own anti-racist cities. So maybe there is a scope for all of us to start forming these anti-racist cities and joining as a nationally, so that we can have stories and collaborations, so that we all bring in the what you call the forces to bring down these structures that are oppressing people locally and nationally.
Thank you. Thanks, Joe. Do we have anybody else? Carol Taylor Spedding. Are you there?
Yes, I'm just unmuting. Thank you.
Yes.
I very much liked Carol Buxton's talk. Well, all the talks have been amazing. But Carol said that she wants to launch a campaign where the hire by the Labour Party will be held to account for its racism. I'd just like to know how we can do that. What's the way forward? Practically, what can we do?
Carol?
I think the way you do it is by holding up a mirror to it. So every time there are issues that show party, for example, the number of people that are being suspended and expelled on the most spurious reasons, you highlight those by joining organisations as an associate or as a full member of JVL, Labour Against the Witch Hunt, etc. And by publicising it and by making a song and dance about it in your own CLPs, raising it with your MPs. And I think it's all linked to the call for democracy in the Labour Party. I know that might sound so far away from where we are now, but that fight has to continue. But at the moment, the fight really has to be on the outside of linking up with organisations with grassroots campaigns on the outside of that are not involved in the Labour Party. So you do, my opinion is that you do both things, that you look in and you look out.
Right, do we have any other comrades who have a contribution to make? I think we should now be focusing on the next step. I would like to propose that any comrades who want to volunteer to be part of a committee in order to take this step forward, I hope that, Dave, Glyn and Jabu would at least be a nucleus of this, and other comrades who want to come in order to plan the next step in actually launching a Labour Against Racism campaign. Are there any other comrades with any practical proposals or who want to volunteer their services? Kieran again, I think. No, sorry, your hand was up. I think it's from a previous time. Is there anybody else? Well, I'm going to ask, in that case, Pam, yes.
I'll volunteer.
Pam Bromley, yes. Unmute yourself, please.
Yeah, sorry, yes, I'll volunteer to get involved in the
Oh, I see.
in the setting up, yeah. Yeah, no, I wasn't going to say anything else, just that.
Good. Karel. You're muted. You're muted, Karel.
Sorry, I think we should all volunteer. I'm definitely volunteering myself, but I think everybody should want to be part of this. I think it's quite a refreshing thought to be part of an organisation like that.
Yeah, I like to be right there in the front line.
Very good. Well, from what we've seen, from what you've done in Oxford, then that's an absolute guarantee of victory and success. So thank you, Jabu. Right. I think we should ask our speakers if they want to come back with the final word, and we will arrange. We'll be in touch in order to plan our next practical step. Glyn, do you want to come back?
Just very briefly, thanks. Clearly what we need to do is to follow the lead that Jabu was talking about, because this organisation within the Labour Party needs to be led by black comrades, by black members. Of course, us white members are going to be there in solidarity and doing as much of the practical work that we can, but it needs to build in the way I think that black sections existed in the Labour Party some time ago, and which were intentionally removed, I think, as a way of displacing that class and race politics with identity politics. And we can see what that has done in terms of Labour BAME and the way in which it's been colonised by Progress and the right wing. So we need to respond on the ground, and we need to engage black members of the party.
Thank you. Jabu, do you want to come back? You're muted again, please.
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, it's just to thank everybody that's here and to actually say it's really, really important for us to keep this this momentum going in terms of the implications of if it could die down. I am scared to actually think about 6 months from now where Black Lives Matter will be. Always in my mind, I'm always filled with how we can sustain this movement, and it's great that we have our white comrades come forward. As I mean, the talks were so, the speeches were so absolutely brilliant tonight, so spot on. Quotations from Fred Hampton. We can only fight this as a revolution, as a force, as people that are fighting capitalism. That's how we have to confront it. So to actually go further, it's to really engage ourselves in activism, more activism, but not just, because the protests will start to dwindle down as time goes on, but we need to sustain this through the activism of organizations that are fighting this. I'm hoping that I'm gonna get a lot of assistance with our Mothers for Justice, because one of my inspiration as to why I'm so determined to fight the criminal justice system. I have a son who has been the victim of police brutality on so many occasions, including being put in prison unfairly. And it's a really hard concept when you tell it to South Africans when I live in the UK, because they think of that in terms of apartheid. They don't see, you have to really explain the institutional racism that exists. I was speaking to my daughter last night, and they went to a party together, and they said the police showed up, and one black guy left, and then my son was about to leave, and my daughter in her shrewd nature said, don't. Sorry, ma'am, who can you mute yourself?
Muslim League, People's Party, MQM.
Can I'm so sorry, sir. Everyone, there's a memhood person that's interrupting. Can our host mute?
Everybody knows.
I want to say emergency.
Roger, you can mute him.
ਉਹ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਵੋਟ ਪਾਣਾ ਪੈਂਦਾ ਨਾ ਉਸ ਨੂੰ ਗ੍ਰਾਮ ਬੇਸ ਤੇ
Can you take
mute everybody and then
ਮੇਰਾ ਭਤੀਜਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਉਹ ਇਮਰਾਨ ਖਾਨ ਦਾ ਸਪੋਰਟਰ ਹੈ ਅੱਜ ਕੱਲ ਦਾ ਪੂਨੇ ਯੂਨੀਵਰਸਿਟੀ
How did this?
Right, sorry, I've now muted everybody, I think. Jabu. Jabu, you have to unmute yourself.
Okay. I'm just going to end this by saying I'm very, very positive about what we're going to do, what this path that we're setting on. It's been great having comrades like Lynn, Dave, just kind of Kevin explain what sort of actions we can take. I feel very empowered and embattled. So my call out to you is that if any expertise that you have, please throw them in our direction. Let's share this work. We are in the struggle together. Thank you.
Thank you, Jabu. Very good. Yes, Glenn.
Could you just connect us up, please, Roger, so that me and Jabu and Dave and other people who want to be involved have got each other's contact details?
Yes, certainly. And I was also going to say, there are, I welcome a number of comrades who haven't been to our meetings before. We have a rapidly growing mailing list, and please, anybody who is not on our mailing list, could you put your emails down on the in the chat room now, so that we can keep in contact with one another, and I can notify you of future meetings. Is there anybody else who wants to speak? Yes, Dave.
Yeah, well, I'll say a few final words. In my part of the meeting, I tried to just give a brief history of some of the black struggles within Britain, and by its very nature, I couldn't include very much, or I left out a lot of things, but I think it was important. And one of the things I didn't talk about was the leaked report, and I think I'm really pleased that someone mentioned that, because I said that Britain, as well as being a workers' party, was part of imperialism. The Labour Party was, in government. it managed the colonies, etc. Okay, there's a whole debate about how they came to, the colonies got their independence, but nonetheless, that is a residue, that's a legacy that has to be dealt with within the Labour Party and the Labour movement. And so I'm glad that that was raised. The other thing I didn't really talk about very much was the struggle against fascism in this country, because that's another subject all on of its own. But it has to be emphasised that I'm not suggesting for one moment that anyone will leave this meeting and think, that's it. That was a really good meeting. I don't really have to do very much. And the reason is because all over the planet, the right wing are rising. And that's, if we do nothing, then we don't oppose them in the most effective way possible, then we're in danger. Trump at the moment, as was mentioned by one of our contributors, it has got this armed force of people with vehicles with no markings on, just arresting people. More like some sort of South American state where people disappear off the street. Okay, they're released again. But I think Trump is testing the waters. And if he gets elected again, you know, what can happen? Remember that, and I'm not making the direct comparison, that Hitler, first of all, used the electoral route to gain power, some form of power. And then he just basically had a coup and took control of society. So I'm not saying that history repeats itself in the same way, but all across Europe, right-wing parties are in one way or another growing in strength. In Poland, we've just seen the right-wing government re-elected. Good that it was a smaller majority, but they used divide and rule, attacking gay people there as their main weapon. So we've got an absolute duty, if we're socialists, to get involved in these campaigns, because they're absolutely fundamental to challenging capitalism. And I'm going to finish on this point. To me, the question is, how are we going to get a new society? Is it reform or revolution? And I think, and I tried to read Rosa Luxemburg's pamphlet, but I've got to say that the language used in that pamphlet is arcane and difficult to understand. I think reform or revolution is absolutely one of the key questions in terms of changing society, because we've had a period of reforms post the Second World War, and in many countries, those reforms, probably all countries, the reforms are being taken away rapidly. Things that we take for granted, decent pensions, public housing, decent pay, trade union rights, are just being taken away by stealth or openly. And left parties like the Labour Party don't have a programme to address that, except when Corbyn was elected, all of a sudden you saw a flourishing of enthusiasm for a party that wanted to change society. Now, I'm not saying that the Labour Party's programme was ideal, but it actually pointed to a different way to challenge the poverty and the backward direction that we've taken since the 70s when Thatcher came to power. And I think the question of reform and revolution is a thing that will echo with young people. Those young climate change activists that I talked about, those Black Lives demonstrators, I don't think they're going to accept just a few meagre reforms. They say, no, society has to be changed fundamentally. And I think we should put revolution on the agenda and argue boldly for that we need a revolutionary change in society, because if we don't, we're going to be wiped out by climate change, and the planet will do the job and deal with us, or it's going to be some other pandemic because of the way capitalism interferes with nature in terms of mass farming of animals and the deforestation, taking away habitat. So these viruses are has to find their host somewhere else. All of these sorts of threats to the human race and these social problems of racism and other problems that I've mentioned means we have to change society. So that's really what I would sum up on.
Right. Well, we've now agreed on a revolution too, so that's a very good note to end on. I'm sure we'll all vote for that. Right, it has been suggested that those comrades who want to participate actively in this, that we arrange a meeting for Wednesday. That's a provisional date. Have we got the email address? If you received a notice for this, then we've already got your email. But if you did not, could you please make sure that your email is recorded on the in the chat room, so that we can add you to the list and we can be in touch about the details of the next meeting, which, if everybody agrees, then we'll say Wednesday, but that's a provisional date so far. Are there any final points, comrades? It's been a very inspiring...
Yeah, I'd like to make a final point. I mean,
sorry?
I'd like to make a final point, if I may. We've been having a lot of strange things going on in Oxford with the Labour Party. There were all these people not supporting Corbyn, and then some of them weakly supporting Corbyn, and then as soon as Keir Starmer throws his hat in the ring, they all switch sides and start supporting Keir Starmer, or Steer Karma, as I call him. I think what we've got to acknowledge, comrades, is that in the Labour Party, there is what I describe as the Murdoch tendency, not the militant tendency, the Murdoch tendency. And I think that these people really are Tories. They are, at the very least, liberal neoliberals. They're sort of neoliberals with a dash of social democracy. But they would really rather be in opposition to the Tories than they would see someone with a mild social democratic program like Jeremy Corbyn achieve power. So what we have to realise, and it's a funny thing, because in Oxford, there are no Conservative councillors. There are what we call the Liberal Lemon Hats, the Liberal Democrats, right? There's some of them. But the other Tories, they're in the Labour Party and they're running it, yeah? This Murdoch tendency has got to be rooted out. It's much more extensive than the militant tendency ever was. It's actually in the Labour Party parliamentary party, it's in the machine of the Labour Party, and a lot of right-wing Blairite councillors have rebranded themselves as Starmerites, yeah? Right. And this is totally against the rank and file membership of the party and most of the Labour Party voters. So basically, our party has been hijacked. When I say our party, I actually left the party due to Neil Kinnock.
All right, comrades, I mean, I'd just like to point out, for comrades who haven't been before, we do have these meetings weekly. We've dealt very exhaustively and I think very successfully with the issues that you raised and many others too, worldwide. I'm gonna be a bit naughty now and say that there are two of us here, Carol Taylor-Spedding and myself, who are standing for the NEC of the Labour Party. That's just a little plug in advance. If anybody is thinking of who they're going to support in the elections for the NEC, please keep us in mind. That's part of the, that really arises directly from what the comrade has just said, Comrade Tim, I think, has just said. So look, if you put your email addresses in the chat room, then we'll be in contact with you. Of course, if you're already on our mailing list, we'll be in contact with you anyway. We hope to see as many of you as possible on Wednesday and at our future meetings, which are always on Sundays. Right, thank you, comrade. Thank you, very, very inspiring.
Thank you.